So hope everybody has the MySQL workbench and the MySQL server ready. That would be helpful in order to run queries. So let's get started with MySQL. MySQL server once installed, we'll be able to log in or view the databases and the tables in the MySQL server using one of the user interfaces. And this user interface is called as the MySQL workbench. And this is a GUI. GUI stands for graphical user interface that helps us to connect to MySQL. So in order to connect to MySQL, we would have to use this particular connection object here, wherein you see this plus symbol. If you click on this plus symbol, right, this opens up this window which asks us to set up new connection. So we'll have the first field as the connection name. So connection name could be given as anything. So I will give this as MySQL connection. Okay, that is what I name it as. And then we have the host name as 127.0.0.1. We'll leave as it is. We'll not really change any values there. And the default port number for MySQL is 3306. So that is what we'll be providing. And while installation, it would have asked for the username. One of the default username it verifies is the root username. So I have provided the root as the name. And while we were installing it, we would be prompted to specify the password. So I've also provided the password while installing MySQL on this machine. So the password is there and I enter the password using this. So I've clicked on store in vault and then click OK, right? Is there any default schema that we would like to specify? If we want to, if nothing is specified, probably we can come back and use it as well. Okay, so that is what we could do. Right now, I'm not specifying anything. So I click on test connection. This success message is displayed, indicating that the connection to the MySQL database or the connection to the MySQL server has been established and it is successful. And it shows up this successfully made the MySQL connection. Okay, so I did this and now I click OK. So this is what we get as, and then finally you can click this OK, right? And then you will see this small username or the connection name in this particular place here. And then you click on it, it will say is opening SQL editor, right? It opens up a SQL editor like this. And if the connection was successful and the username and the password were authenticated correctly, this is what would happen. You would see something like this. And there would be some schemas here or databases here on the left-hand side. Now, probably some of them might not be visible. For example, I would have created CouchDB, LearningDB, ProductsDB, but the other databases that we have, Sys, World, and Sequila, that is something that should be available, right? These are the default databases that we might see, right? And in order to open up the editor for MySQL, you can use something like this new query tab that opens up an editor like this, or you can click here in this window, the first icon that you see below the file menu. All right, this is also called as SQL editor. If you click on this, this will help us to create a tab like this or a file like this. Okay, this is basically an editor where we can start or we can provide queries in order to execute against a particular database, right? So the left side navigator window that you see here, this is where the schemas or the databases are available. So within the server, there are different databases. And there is also an administrator tab wherein we can manage the MySQL instance. Probably as part of these sessions, we'll not focus on MySQL administration. But what we'll do is we'll look at SQL aspect only, and that is what our session's objective is as well. Okay. So once we do this, you will be having this editor window opened. Fine. Once the editor window is open, we can start using this particular editor window and start seeing queries. So the first statement that we will try to do is with respect to MySQL is select. Okay, so I provide something like this, select, and then in double quotes, I give a string value, hello world. Okay, and then I end with semicolon. So select hello world. This would give us hello world as the output. we are not selecting any table or a database has not been used. Anything as such has not been used in this particular query editor. All that we are trying to do is we just want to select a string which is called as hello world, right? And select is a statement which is used in order to retrieve data or view data. That is what select is used for. And this is something that we can use as a DML, right? So I execute this, and as you see below, there are two parts to it. One is called as the output, the other one is the result grid. So in the result grid, you would see the results or the display of what we have executed or we have selected. Essentially, whatever we want to view, that is available in the result grid, right? So we see hello world, something like this, and then there is an output called as an hello world in the result grid. And in the output below, there is the output pane. And as you see here, there are certain statements that are indicated, and there is a green check mark, which indicates that the statement that we have executed in the query editor is correct. And it says one rows returned, and it says select hello world limit 0, 1000, one rows returned, right? And there is also a duration for which this particular query ran, and this is somewhat in milliseconds. That is what we would see here. Okay, so that is what you would be seeing here when we ran this. So if there are any errors, right, or if you had seen some kind of installation issues, please post it in our WhatsApp group. We will take it offline. We will check what are the issues, etc., and then we'll try to resolve them. All right. But for now, if there are any errors or anything, I would request you to, post them in the group, in our WhatsApp group. Probably we will try to answer them later. For now, probably if there is no MySQL server, request you to check on these statements that we are executing, and then probably then try to run them when it is working fine. Okay, so that is what we'll try to do. And we have the first select statement here. And this is called as select hello world. Okay. Then here we will try to see what version we are using. So I use something like version, comma, and then current date. Right? This is what I'm trying to use here. Current date is basically a inbuilt function that is available in MySQL. Version is also an inbuilt function. So we would like to know what is the current version of this database and also what is the current date. So if we execute this, the query ran successfully, and we would see the version is 8.0.32. That is what is the version. And the current date is 13 June 2023. That is what is printed out. So when we do current version and the current date, these are the timestamp date and the version that would be displayed. All right. So this is how it would display. Alternatively, we can use something like this, select version, and then we can provide these values or the function names in lowercase. So I use current date in everything in lowercase and try to execute this. To execute this on this Windows machine, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to execute using Control Enter. Okay. Control Enter helps us execute the statements. So for example, we have select, then the version function, current underscore date function, and it is ended by a semicolon, right? So that is what we have. And then when we run this statement, right, when we do Control Enter, the entire line gets executed or the entire statement gets executed. Okay, this is one way of doing it. And we have also Windows, the Thunderbolt kind of symbol here. If you hover over it in the editor file menu, right, this is what you would see. And whatever is selected, let's say I select this and I want to execute this. Either we use Control Enter, or we can select this particular symbol button, right, which is kind of execute the statement. It says execute the selector portion of the script or everything if there is no selection. When we don't select anything, the entire file or the entire set of statements that are there in the file gets executed. Right, so this is how we will be able to execute statements. Fine. And our SQL statement generally ends with a semicolon. To mark the end of the statement, we use a semicolon at the end. right? Alternatively, we can also specify, let's say we are using something like this, version. When I'm using version, please note that V is only in the capital case. Similarly, I use current underscore DATE, right? D is only in the capital case, right? Even then, this is a correct way of execution, right? Version and current date, we have not used the capitalized version, but only the first letter in the word has been capitalized. Similarly, for current underscore date, D is only capitalized. Or if you want to capitalize C, then we can also do that and then see what it returns. So when we do this, it gives us the output properly, right? So these are various ways in which we can call a particular inbuilt function that is available. But one of the things that we are observing is that whenever especially when we are talking about the industry or when we want to use certain statements, right? One of the things that is observed is that the keywords are generally in uppercase letters, just like what we used select, right? This is in uppercase. We can also write something like this, select version, right? Current underscore date, right? These are already inbuilt function and these are some select is a keyword. So even this works, even if you're not trying to write it in an uppercase letters, we are using a lowercase letter. This is also fine. This is also accepted. But however, it is recommended or it is suggested that we use uppercase letters for keywords, especially when it comes to SQL. Okay, so this is how we'll be able to do. Let's say we want to perform a mathematical operation. Let's say I want to do something like this, 4 times 5, and I want to know the output. So a basic mathematical operation of 4 times 5 is done, and it uses an output here, right? So this is again represented in a tabular format. In the result grid, this is essentially represented in a tabular format. So we have done select 4 times 5. Let's say if we want to kind of do something else, let's say we want to use the sine function, and inside the sine function, I pass pi function, right, divided by 6. So this is pi by 6, or this is sine of pi by 6, right? Sine of pi by 6, and I put a semicolon. Sine of pi by 6 or sine 30 is nothing but 0.5, or it is half. That is what we know. So we get 0.4999994, right? Approximation. So this is essentially approximated to 0.5. So that is what sine function provides us as the output. We pass certain value to the sine function and it gives us the output. So these kind of mathematical functions are also there. We can look at them as we go further, right? So these are inbuilt in MySQL Server and we can use them for some kind of computations. Let's say we want to know the user who is using it now, right? Who is the user, and also we want to know the current date. So what we are trying to do here is we are trying to select the user, space or the comma, and then the current date, right? That is what we're trying to do. And I execute this statement. So what does it give as the output is, it gives us root at the rate localhost, indicating that the current user is root and it has been logged in, or the user has been logged in at the rate localhost. And the current date is 13th June 2023, right? Or 2023-06-13. So we could say this is YYY-MM-DD format, right? That is the format in which the date is printed. Okay, so that is how we'll be able to get the values in this case. Fine. So we get the user and the current date in this fashion. All right, so that is how we'll be able to use some of them. Before we get started or start creating tables, let's try to look at how do we use various data types that are available in MySQL, right? Right now, we have not specified what data type it should be. All that we have used for the select statement is essentially some inbuilt function, and we want to see the data, how the data is printed and what is happening. So in order to use the columns with certain values, or we want to represent data in a database within a table, all that we have to know initially is the various data types. Now, there are various data types. So in MySQL supports a lot of them. So we'll try to see what are the various data types in MySQL. And the first one is the numeric data types. Okay, we have the numeric data types, and the various data types with respect to numeric data types are, we could say we could have tiny int, then we have small int, then we have medium int, and then we have big int. These are the various data types that we have. Essentially, these data types differ in the amount of bytes that are being stored. For example, tiny int stores 1 byte. Tiny int stores 1 byte. Small int stores about 2 bytes of data. And the range of values is also different. Medium int stores about 3 bytes of data, and big int stores 4 bytes. Right? These are the amounts of data it stores. So we have the 1 byte, 2 bytes, 3 bytes, and 4 bytes. So this is for int. Similarly, for date, right? Date also has different data types, and as you go further, we'll try to discuss them. But to begin with, there is also integer and int also. We have int and integer. Right? And then we have date data types, and in date we have different data types. One is date itself, then we have time, then we have timestamp, and we have year. Okay, so we have date, time, and there is also date time. Yes, there is also date time. That is also something that we have as date. So if you want to store time or date values, right, this is what would be helpful. We can store these kind of values within the MySQL database with respect to date time. All right, so that is with respect to date. Fine. And then we have string data types. So for string data types, we have values like char, varchar, binary, then we have var binary, then we have blob, then we have text, then we have enum and set. These are the various data types that come with string. And char is essentially about 4 bytes. That is what it actually stores data. Varchar is like variable character, so it could be 4 bytes or more than 4 bytes or variable. Binary and var binary are essentially storing data in the binary format. That is what binary and var binary have. And if you have very large binary objects that we want to store, then we can use blob. And if the value is a lot bigger, or if you want to store some kind of representation of data that is there in string, then we can use text. For different options or values that we have, we may use enum, and set is basically a set kind of representation of that data. And again, there is a classification with respect to blob and text. In blob, we have different data types, and in text also we have different data types. Oops. So in blob, we have, this comes under string. So in blob, we have tiny blob. Then we have, 1 second, we'll write it. We have tiny blob. Then we have medium blob. Then we have blob. and then we have long blob. Right, so these are the types of data that are there in blob. Similarly, for text also, we have different types of data types. So we have tiny text, then we have text. So just give a minute. Text. Then we have medium text, and they have long text. Right, so these are the various data types that we have. So we have all of these under string data types. Okay, these would fall under string data types. So for Boolean, we have true and false, and they could be either bool or Boolean. So we can have bool or Boolean, and essentially true and false values. So we can have true, false, right? These are the things that we can have, or these are the values that we can have for bool or Boolean. And apart from these, we can have data types for spatial and JSON also. That is also supported in MySQL. Now, once we have these data types, what we'll try to do is we'll try to use these data types in order to create one table and then start querying that table. But where does the table reside? So when we logged in the MySQL server, we see there is something called as a database. So the first thing that we will try to do is we will try to create a database. Fine. What we'll try to do is we'll create a database, and to create a database, we use this statement create database is the keyword, and then followed by the database name. So what is the database name? We will call this as Kirana DB. Okay, that is what we will be using our database name as. So Kirana DB, and we create a database. Right now on the left-hand side, you see the database name. It is still not reflected, right? So the schemas or the databases are present in the MySQL server. And right now we have CustDB, LearningDB, ProductsDB, and other databases that are there. Now, if you want to see if this database is available or not, all that we want to do is we have to refresh this. Right? There is a refresh button just against the schemas in the navigator pane. You just have to click that so that the databases are refreshed. Any objects that have been created or modified and we want to see them, we can use this refresh button. So once we do this, right, we see this Kirana DB here, and if we pull it down, it shows tables, views, stored procedures, and functions. So these are the other kind of objects that are available in this database. So a database has been created called as Kirana DB, and there are other objects that could be available in Kirana DB, like tables, like views, like stored procedures and functions. We have still not discussed them, but this is how we will be able to view them. Once created, they will be available inside the database. We can navigate through the database and see if there are any or not. And the first thing that we have done is we have created a database, right? We can create a database in this fashion. Create a database, space database name. Let's say we want to remove this database, right? So we want to remove this. So I said drop the database. How do we do that? Drop database and then Kirana, right? And in the action output window, right, it shows that the database has been dropped, right? And also the database is no longer visible under the schemas navigator, or in the navigator window under schemas, it is not present, right? So we see that the Kirana DB is not available. Fine. So this is what has happened. So this has been dropped, right? So let's say I want to run this again, drop Kirana DB again. So what it shows is an error. It indicates this particular database is not available, right? So this is how errors pop up, right? If we try to drop a database that is not existing in the schema itself, then we see this is the error that it shows up. So what we do is we kind of use some kind of if statements within this drop statement or within the for the database also. Now, how do we use that, right? We have done this in this way. We have created a database and dropped the database. So let's say I want to create the database again, right? So we want to create the database. We can use the same command, which is create database name. So we can use this create database and then Kirana DB. Right. So now this gets executed and we get this green check mark indicating that this is executed correctly. And then we can verify this in the schemas pane or in the navigator pane. Just refresh this and we get the Kirana DB again back, right? So if I try to run this again, let's say I already the Kirana DB is existing, but I want to run this again, create database Kirana DB, and it says that there is some kind of an error. And what is this error? It says can't create database Kirana DB because it exists, right? That is what we get. The error code is 1007 and it says this database is already existing. So when we want to run this in a safe manner, right? So we use what is called as if exists. If it not exists, right? Sorry, if it does not exist, if the database does not exist, we have to create the database, right? So what we'll do is we'll slightly modify our database and then add if not exists and then the database name, right? So create database and then specify if not exists and then specify the database name ending with the semicolon, right? So now I use control enter and there is no error as such. It uses a warning kind of a message, right? One row is affected, one warnings, it says cannot create database. Instead of an error, it has given us a warning, right? So that is what we can do when we are using if not exists, right? That is how we'll be able to use it. So similarly, we can drop the database only if exists, right? How do we do that? Drop the table only, drop the database only if it exists. If it exists, then only it has to be dropped, right? So in such cases, we can write the statement in this fashion: drop database Kirana DB, and all that we'll do is we'll just put here if exists, right? That is what we try to do here. Drop the database if it exists and the database name. So this will drop the database if it is existing, right? So multiple executions also will not result in errors. All that we'll see is there is some kind of a warning message instead of an error, right? That is how we can do this statement or executes this statement multiple times. Okay, so that is what we have seen. Now, how do we view what our databases are using SQL? So view all the databases that are there in this connection that we have seen. So how do we do that? Show databases. Right? If we say show databases, in the result grid, the databases that are there in this server is printed out. So we have CustDB, we have information schema, we have Kirana DB, we have other databases, we have the MySQL database and the information schema database. Right? And also sys as well, the default database that we get is Sakila. So these are the databases that we get and we are able to view them, right? And this is represented in a tabular format. So when we do show databases, this has shown us the databases that is present in this particular connection. Fine, that is what we get as the output. Now let's say we have started using this particular session and we want to start working upon a database. So in order to work upon a database and the objects within that database, we have to start using it, right? That is what we have to do here in SQL. So we specify use and then the database name. We have created a database called as Kirana DB. So now it's highlighted. If you look at the navigator pane and inside the schemas section, Kirana DB is highlighted in bold, indicating that this is the current database that we are trying to use. So use space Kirana DB. Right? That is what is represented. So use Kirana DB and then a semicolon. we start using the database. Okay, so that is how we can start using our database. And if you want to see which database is currently selected, right? So we can specify something like this: select database. Okay, and then semicolon. It gives us that Kirana DB is the current database. Which database is being used currently? It is the Kirana DB. Okay, so that is how we can use the database or select the working database. That is what we have done here. Okay, and now if we want to see how this database has been created, we can do something like this: show create database and then Kirana, which is nothing but the database name, right? Whatever the constructs that are being used or have been used in order to create this database, we will be able to use. So now we have the database as the output and the create database. So as we see, this is the output, the database and the create database command or the column. We have the database column and the create database column. Under the database, we have the Kirana DB, and under the create database, we have how it was created. So create database, and then it says Kirana DB, and then it ends the line. So this is how we can use, for example, even for table also, instead of using database, we'll use table. Show create table, and then the table name will list us all the results of how the table was created. Fine. So this is how we'll be able to do with respect to databases. So we have done how to list and create a database. Fine. I'll also see how create database command was executed, or what was the construct of create database. These are the things that we have seen. Now, once this is done, what we'll try to do is we'll try to create a table within this database. All right, so any questions still here? Okay, so once we have done this, let's try to create a table in this database. So we have already selected Kirana DB as our database. So that is what is the current database on which we'll be working upon. So how do we start creating a table within a database? A database can consist of one table or more than one table, right? That is what would be a database consisting of. And we know already a table. Table is nothing but horizontal rows and vertical columns, and it is organized in a tabular format. That is what is a table. So when we want to create a table needs to have a name, and it should have like some columns. Okay, that is what a table should have. So instead of Kirana DB, let's select sys database. Okay, we already have sys database. Okay, I have selected sys database, and I want to see the tables within them, right? These are system tables, right? It gives us a lot of tables that are there in the sys database, right? And we generally do not touch these tables, these databases, especially like sys and information schema. We don't use them for our use. We create a database and then start using that database, just like what we have done with respect to Kirana DB. So let's try to use our Kirana DB again. So our Kirana database is ready. So I go back and switch it and then start using the Kirana DB. Okay, and how about the tables within the Kirana DB? And if we look at the navigator for Kirana DB under the schema section, left side, right? So it shows tables, views, everything. Nothing is actually present there. It shows the objects, but probably nothing is present inside. How do we know from the query editor? So we'll try to use show tables within the Kirana DB, right? And if you look at the output, right, in the result grid, the query has run successfully and it says no tables, right? In the tables in Kirana DB, it shows empty. There are no tables in the table grid or in the result grid, right? So there is nothing that is right now available. So we'll start creating a table within the Kirana DB database that we have created. And what do we call this table? We will call this table items. Okay. So that is what we will get from the Kirana store, right? That or the retail store. So we'll try to use or try to create a table within this particular database. So we are using the Kirana DB and we'll start creating the items that are there in the table. All right. So how do we create a table? To create a table, we have this syntax, which is create table, table name. Okay. That is how we will try to use it. So how do we use the table name? Create table, table name. That is what we'll try to use here. So first thing is create table, and then we'll call our table name as items. Okay. And similarly, what we have done for database, if the table does not exist, only then we have to create it, right? Or the database did not exist, only then we want to create it. So I use this if not exists. So create table if not exists, then with the table name, right? The table name is items. And all of these that we have used, create table if not exists, these are MySQL keywords. All right, so that is what we are trying to do. And we have opened up a parenthesis and closed a parenthesis. That is what we have done here. Okay. So the first thing that we'll try to do here is that we will try to create what is called as a item ID. Okay, item ID and the name of the item. And since we have given the names to it, right, we will also provide some kind of data type to it. So I'll call this as integer data type. That is what we'll have the type for this. And the item name, I will give this as varchar, variable character length. And probably this will have about a 40 character length for the item name. And next thing is manufactured date, or we'll try to do is just a simple thing, or manufacturer for now, manufacturer. And for the manufacturer, again, the name for it. So we'll have varchar of 50, some company name, and then item description. So I call item description. This is also varchar of 50. Okay, item description. And then we'll have quantity. Quantity is represented in integer value. Okay, that is what we try to do. And then we'll try to provide a particular price to this particular for every item. What is the price of it? Okay, so I'll take this as decimal, and it will have about, let's say, 7 values and 2 decimals. That is what I represent here. Okay, so decimal 7,2. So last 2 values would be the decimals. In the total length of 7, it will be having last 2 values as the decimals. Okay, so that is what we have done here. Okay, and we have used the statement for creating a table. And how did we create a table? Let us review it. Right, we have done in this fashion, create table if not exists items. And then we have provided the column names first and the respective data type. So column name, respective data type, and then if needed, we will add constraints. Probably next time that we start doing it, we'll start adding constraints also. But for now, we have not added any constraints as such, all that we have done is we have created a database, and then we want to create a table with some column names and the respective data types as mentioned here. So let's run this. So I select this entire statement, create table, and then try to run it. So it says create table formed correctly. So now, how do we know if it is available in the database? So previously there were no tables, and now I do show tables. So we get items in the particular Kirana DB database, and that is what this is displaying as well. Tables in Kirana DB is basically items. So that is what we have in the Kirana DB database. Right now we have one table, which is called as items table. So once we have this table, right, we can see how this table has been constructed, right? So we can do this again, show create table name, and it was items, right? So it gives us the display of it, right? So if I copy this particular row and then put it here, just try to see how this has been constructed. So it uses this kind of format to create a table, right? So it says create table, items, etc. And this is the format it uses to create the table. Okay, that is how we'll be able to retrieve the create statement after we see that, after we use show create table items, right? That is how this gets created. Okay, so that is what we have done here. Though, so we have created a table here. All right. Okay, so the next thing is we have a table. Now we want data in this table, or we want to know what are the various data types with respect to table. First thing is we'll try to see what are the data types. So I said describe items. So when we say describe items, it provides us the respective column names, the data type, and whether it is null or not. And if the key is identified for some kind of use, we'll see what are the different keys that are available and what is the default value for this particular field. Right now, we have not mentioned any default values. We'll also see as we do another example. And also see what is essentially this null value, etc. And also some constraints that we will add. So right now we have not done that. All that we have done is we have created a simple table with some columns. Right? There is an ID, there is an item name, there is a manufacturer, there is item description, quantity, etc. Right? So now, once we have done this, we have certain columns ready. Let me try to take a note of these columns. Right? We have item name, manufacturer, item description, quantity, and price. So we want to add some data to this. We have already seen how the table is created, what the data types are, but then there is no data within this particular table, right? And there are also no constraints. What do we mean by constraints? Some kind of rules that the column should follow, or certain values can be allowed to be entered into the table. So those things are essentially constraints. Right now, nothing is there. So what we'll try to do is on this particular table that we have created, we will try to add data to it, right? So how do we add data? For that, we use what is called as an insert statement. There is also another way of loading the data into a table using load command. Probably when time permits, we'll also see how to load data, a CSV file or a text file directly into a database. Right, so we want to insert or add records to the table that has been created. What is the table name? This is the items table, right? We want to add this, so that is how we can do so. So there is something called as insert, or we can use using the load command to insert data into a table. The first thing that we'll do is we'll try to insert one record. Right? So how do we insert? So we have insert into table name. What is the table name? We have items, and what should be done? We want to insert into items values, right? And what are the values that we want to insert into the table? The first one is ID. So I give the ID as 9001. Okay, that is our ID. Then we have the item name, right? Item ID, and then we have the item name. So item name is Johnson Baby Soap. Okay, that is what we have as the item name. And then we have the manufacturer. So let me put this as Johnson and Johnson. Okay, I put them as into this. After that, after the item name, we have item description, right? The manufacturer is Johnson and Johnson. Then we have item description used for babies. That is what we have as the description. And then we have quantity and price, right? These are the two things that we have. So as part of what is there in the inventory, we'll put it has about 35 or 30 pieces and each is priced about 105 rupees. So that is what we are trying to do. Okay, so and then the semicolon. So how did we insert the data? All that we are doing is use the insert statement and then into table name values, right? And then open the parentheses, specify the values for the column names. Right now we are specifying as it is without any change, right? We have not missed even one of them. Now hit Control Enter and it says that the insert statement has completed successfully. So insert is fine. Okay, so that is what we have done. So once this is done, let's say we want to add more records or we want to add multiple records. How do we do that? So in order to do that, we can use something like this, insert into items values. And in order to add multiple records into all of the rows or all of the columns, I'm doing this. And then here we will try to add values. So we'll add 9002, Patanjali. And then the manufacturer. Okay, and item. This is hot and spicy probably. That is the description that we have. And what is the quantity of it? Let's say we have about 20 packs. And what is the price of it? 10 rupees. Okay, that is what we have here. So this is one value, but then I want to add one more record. I specify comma and then use this. Okay. Instead of ending the semicolon there, I added one more comma here and then start using them here. Right. And another next line. And if you want to add these, I'll just change this. And probably otherwise will not change this. Okay, I'll just add it as it is. We'll see what it means. And then I'll add one more comma and modify this and add the value. And then this would be new ID. Then I would say this one is an oil is the item that we have. And let's say this is some company called as HU that is doing this. And we already know what it does. So the description is Thanda Cool Cool. Right. And then the quantity that are present or that we need, that is what we are looking at. So this is probably about 40 units, and each one is causing or costing us about 75 rupees. Okay, and then remove this, and then we have a semicolon. So we are having 3 rows now, or 3 records that would be added to the table. And we have used 9002 as twice, and we have 9003. Right, we insert this and we can execute this. So I hit Control Enter, and it says the records have been inserted. Okay, so we have about some data in our tables, but we have still not retrieved them. Okay, so how do we kind of retrieve the data from the table? How do we retrieve it? The thing that we can do to retrieve all the columns from the table. What is the table name? Items. Right? That is what we want to do. We want to select all columns. Select all columns from a table. Right? And this is what it uses. Select star from items. That is what I try to execute this. And in the result grid, as we see, we have item ID, item name, manufacturer, item description, quantity, and the price as the column names. And then we have other records under the column names, right? So we have 9001, Johnson Baby Soap, the manufacturer name, the description, quantity, and price. Then we have two 9002s, and then we have 90. So in this case, we have two duplicate records as well. So if we execute this again, let's say I execute this insertion statement again. Let's say we try to insert. We try to run this statement again, insert into values again. Right? It gets executed again. So we have where we want to select the tables again with all the columns. So I use select star from items, and it returns us this output. Right? So each and every time that we are trying to do this, it is giving us the output, and the output shows all of the columns. And if you look at the output window or the output pane, when we ran it, it says 5 rows returned. Right? So 5 rows are there. So let me try to do an insert again, insert into values with this set of values. And again, let me try to run this select star from items now. How many records should be there? So it is having 8 rows returned. So there are 8 rows in our table. Okay, that is what is given as output. So if you want to know how many records are there, we can do something like this: count star from items. Right? It says the total number of records or rows in a particular table. So select count star from the table name, right? So count can be used to know the number of records in the table. And how did you use this? Select space count star from table name. Table name is essentially items. Right? So we have 8 records in our table, and we have selected all the columns. How do we select all the columns? Select star from items. Let's say we want to select a single column. Select only a single column from the table. We want to select a single column. How do we do that? Select, and then we had item ID from items. Right? This is one column. To select one column from the table, right? So it gives us all the records for the column called as item ID. That is what it gives us. So select item ID from items. So this is how we will be able to select a single column. Let's say we want to select multiple columns. Then we can use select. The syntax would be something like this: column 1, comma. I'm just providing the placeholders: column 2, comma so on till column n. How many columns we want to select, that many columns can be selected, and then from table name. Right, this is how we'll be able to retrieve multiple columns. So we have item ID, and then we have item name, and then we have price. That is what we want to get from items. Right, so it gives us all the records for only the mentioned column. So we have item ID, item name, and price. And if we look at the output for the select for this item ID, item price from items, it says 8 rows have been recorded. So 8 rows, or the 8 records, or 8 tuples have been returned for this execution. So we are able to view the data in the tabular format here. So select item ID, item name, price from items, gives us the display in this fashion, right? So we can provide any number of columns like this, comma separated, specify the column name, and then retrieve it from a particular table. So this is how we can display the data for different columns, or single column, or multiple columns from a table. All right. So any questions on this, folks? All right. So if there are no questions, then we will stop here, and we'll look at other aspects in our next upcoming session. All right. Till then, bye-bye and good night. If you have any questions, please post them on WhatsApp. We can take them offline.